Hello everyone. At the end of the last lesson, Moses had led the people into the wilderness, not into the promised earth. Now we might ask, why didn't he go right to the promised earth? Must remember that this is an allegory. It's about each one of us. Each one of us is to some degree a Moses. Each one of us is to some degree one of the followers. They went into the wilderness because we all, when we leave our pharaohs, people who have been indoctrinating us, it could be our parents, it could be clergy, it could be the media, it could be our social group, when we decide to go on the way of the soul and make spirit guidance more important than anything we hear from other people, and when we have not learned yet and mastered the art of listening to spirit every instant, we enter the wilderness, which is a time when sometimes we're in touch with spirit and sometimes we're not. So we have very little water, and water is the metaphor for inspiration. Let me read a passage from Exodus that tells us the situation of these people. Remember, they've been hundreds of years enslaved as dogmaites to a dogmaite pharaoh and his clergy and his politicians. And so they're in a wilderness in which they're trying to find their own footing. How can they live without being controlled? Exodus explains this. They went for 3 days in the wilderness of Moriah and found no water. In other words, they had problems. They could not be one with spirit. And when they came to the waters of Moriah, they could not drink it because it was bitter. Inspiration is bitter when we know it with the tree of the knowledge of good and bad rather than with the tree of the knowledge of life. And the people murmured against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" Moses cried out to Being. Being showed him a tree to throw into the water. Of course, that tree is the tree of the knowledge of life. Having thrown it, the water was made sweet. Okay, there was a lot of information in that paragraph. We are all being inspired every moment. We can listen for the inspiration to know things as perfect just the way they are, or we can continue to see things as bad and good primarily. It takes a lot of patience to sit with spirit and to let spirit disclose how our situation is the next perfect step in our life. These people were unwilling to do that, and they murmured and they clamored to Moses, demanding answers because they were in a lot of pain. We're all in pain when we see things as bad and we want things to be good. Moses, instead of teaching the people to use the tree of life to know their inspiration, he did it. He used the tree of life to get inspiration for them, and then he gave them the answers. Now that's just very tricky. He could have said, "No, I'm not going to give you the answers. I want you to learn to listen to spirit on your own, and I will help you do that." One of the tricks is begin to learn to eat only of the tree of the knowledge of life. Wait and wait until finally you're in oneness with yourself, oneness with others, and you embrace what is going on is perfect just the way it is. Then you'll be given the next steps to remain in stillness, and to find exactly what you're looking for that will lead you to the next level of truth and love. But he didn't do that. That is the situation that many clergy find themselves in, and many parents. They would like their congregation, they would like their clergy, their children, to find their own answers, to become adults. But in times of crisis, people don't want to do that. even in not in times of crisis. They want to come to a Sunday or a Saturday service and be given a sermon that makes them feel good. They don't want to learn to make themselves feel good by listening to Spirit every moment. And so the clergyman has a choice. He can either begin to teach them to listen to Spirit, in which case they probably will rebel. They say, we hired you to spend days during the week to make up this sermon to make us feel comfortable. And this clergyman is looking out at people in his congregation, some of whom are progressives, some of whom are conservatives, some who want change, some who want everything to remain the same. And he's got to put together a sermon that'll please everybody and make everybody feel comfortable. He has to compromise, or he's going to lose his job. This is the situation with Moses. He is beginning to compromise. He is beginning to become a Pharaoh himself. He's led them out of the dogma-religion, and he's taking the first step to leading them back into it. Now this situation continued. As we read through Exodus, they go from one section of the wilderness to another, and in each one, the people continue to clamor for inspiration by saying, I want water or I want food. Food is another metaphor for inspiration. At one point, Moses appeals to being, and being sends down manna, which is a kind of a bread from heaven to show the people that inspiration is available to them at any time that they want to go out and gather it. Instead, they keep insisting that Moses gives them their answers. Let me read a short passage from Exodus that tells us the situation. It began to happen that Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood around him from morning till evening. So we've got a situation where Moses' time is given over totally, not to teaching them to become independent, but to helping them with their problems. It's like a clergyman who spends the week with people coming, asking for help and wanting to know the answers. For example, maybe their son has died, and they want to know what happens after one dies. The clergyman has two choices. He can say, I can teach you to listen to Spirit, and you discover your own answers, or I can give you the one that was told to me in the seminary. Often they do the latter because the people are in so much pain. Moses is doing that. He's becoming a Pharaoh. Now let's read a passage that shows the next step in how Moses developed his religion. One day, Moses' father-in-law saw all that he was doing for the people. He said, "What is this thing you are doing for the people? Why do you alone sit as a judge?" Moses said to his father-in-law, "Because the people come to me to inquire of the gods. When they have a dispute, it is brought to me, and I judge between a man and his neighbor, and make known God's decrees and laws." Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, replied, "What you are doing is not good. You will wear out, both you and the people who are with you. The task is too heavy. You cannot do it alone. Listen, select from all the people able men who fear the gods, men of truth who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them over them as thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. They will judge the people at all times, but every major dispute the judges will bring to you, but every minor dispute they can decide." So Moses heeded the voice of his father-in-law and did all that he had said. Moses is wearing himself out being the judge of the people. His father-in-law says, "Appoint a hierarchy of ministers, priests, judges, who will carry out your will and tell the people all the answers that they want. This would be like a pope who begins to appoint cardinals, who begin to appoint bishops, who begin to appoint priests, all for the purpose of giving common answers to people when it's appropriate and helping them with their individual problems. They're not teaching them to be independent of the church, to be independent of the dogmas, of the laws, but rather because there's a hierarchy, it's a method of exercising control over a large number of people. So you can see these are the stages of the development of a religion. A charismatic person goes to his mountain, goes high in himself, gets inspiration, wants to help the people want to be told their answers, and so he gives them their answers. Muhammad did it through the Quran, Christianity did it through Paul the Apostle. Every religion usually starts with a charismatic cult leader who, instead of teaching people to find their own answers, begins to build up his ego and to give the people the dogma that they desire, that makes them feel secure. And then, of course, they get angry because they're being controlled by that religion. The equivalent thing happens in political parties. The equivalent thing happens in society as a whole. We're a society controlled by leaders who want to provide the dogma that people are seeking. Jesus wrote a poem about this situation. It's a very powerful poem. Let me read it to you. Woe to them, the Pharisees, for they resemble a dog, he resting upon the manger of some oxen. For when he rests there, he eats not, and he permits not the oxen to eat. A Pharisee is an indoctrinator. It can be a parent. Each one of us has done it. It can be a clergyman. It can be a politician. But a Pharisee, Jesus calls, or an indoctrinator, Jesus is calling a dog. A dog at his time was the lowest of the low. They ate off the garbage dump. And what he says is, when we indoctrinate others rather than give them their own answers, we are a dog. A dog is the lowest of the low at his time. And he says the dog is resting on the manger. The manger is the place where these oxen eat. Oxen is a metaphor for stubborn people who are trying to learn to live from the Spirit. They can't eat inspiration from this manger because the dog is laying on it. The indoctrinator is stopping them from eating what they need in order to be free and independent, grand human beings. And he says, the dog does not eat, and he prevents other people from eating. So the dog is not eating inspiration. The clergyman, the indoctrinator, is eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and bad, and is not eating from the tree of the knowledge of life. Powerful poem. Now let's read another passage from Exodus. In Exodus 19 we read, Moses went up on the mountain, being called to him and said, put limits for the people around the mountain and tell them, be careful that you do not approach the mountain or touch the foot of it, for whoever touches the mountain is to be put to death. Now let me explain this as I understand it. A mountain is not a physical mountain. A mountain means when someone goes up on the mountain, we go high in ourselves. We get alone, become peaceful. We can go on a mountain in our bedroom. Now, when we go on that mountain, we have a choice of conjuring up the spirit that we're going to be talking to. It can be a spirit of anger, or it can be a spirit of love. Moses goes up on the mountain, and he is told by the spirit he has created. Now, this is his interpretation of spirit. Do not permit people to go up on their mountain and find their answers. Instead, put limits around the mountain so that people have to go through you. That happens in religions when people are told unconsciously, I cannot communicate directly with spirit. It has to be somebody who goes to the seminary, or it has to be somebody who wears special clothes. It has to be a clergyman. It has to be someone who can stand up in front of everybody else and talk. So people are disempowered. That's putting limits around the mountain from communicating directly with spirit. That's all part of religion. When you've got people up lecturing to people, telling them how to think and act, as if they have some kind of privileged information that other people cannot access, you're putting limits around the mountain. That's another stage in the development of religion. Jesus commented on that situation where people feel disempowered. Let me read you his poem. The Pharisees and the scribes took the keys of knowledge and they hid them. Nor did they go inward. And those others who desired to go inward, they did not permit them. The Pharisees and the scribes, again, are metaphors for each one of us when we indoctrinate. They refused to go inward to discover inspiration from spirit with the tree of the knowledge of life, and they did not permit other people to go inward. That's the force of the poem. Now, at this point, Moses has set up a hierarchy of judges. The judges, of course, need guidance. They need about what to declare to the people and how to judge. They need doctrine. They need dogma. They need rules. So now Moses is going to give them that. He goes back up on the mountain and he establishes two things, the 10 Commandments and the over 600 Torah Laws. Let's read some of them. The 10 Commandments. Do not bring other gods before my face. Do not make for yourself an idol. Do not use the name of being to build yourself up. Remember the Sabbath day. Honor your father and mother. Do not murder. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not make false witness against your neighbor. Do not covet anything that is your neighbor's. You notice that those laws are general laws. Moses then went ahead and established very specific laws called Torah Laws. There's over 600 of them. Let me read you a few. When you buy a Hebrew slave, he shall serve 6 years, and in the 7th he shall go out free. If he comes in by himself, he shall go out by himself. If he comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him. That's one of the Torah laws. When a man sells his daughter as a slave, she shall not go out as the male slaves do. If she does not please her master who designated her for himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. He shall have no right to sell her to a foreign people, since he has dealt unfairly with her. If he designates her for his son, he shall deal with her as with a daughter. Okay, here's another one. If people fight and hit a pregnant woman and she gives birth prematurely, but there is no serious injury, the offender must be fined whatever the woman's husband demands and the court allows. But if there is a serious injury, you are to take a life for a life, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a hand for a hand, a foot for a foot, a burn for a burn, a wound for a wound, a bruise for a bruise. So Moses has taken the next step in forming a religion. He has established a hierarchy. He has made himself and his hierarchy very special in the sense that they are the ones who can communicate directly with Spirit. No one else can. And now he declares many laws, over 600 laws and commandments to guide the people. He's established the basic belief system, the creed for this religion. Now they have the dogma and the laws that they need to control their life without thinking. So the people began this whole process by not being willing to, but they wanted to leave Egypt. They wanted to leave a dogma-based religion, and they didn't force, they compelled Moses. He didn't have to yield to them, but he did, to form another religion, which has become Judaism. Now let's see the implications further. I'm going to read another passage. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, and where he was forming the 10 Commandments and the Torah Laws, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron, Moses' brother, and said to him, "Up, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." And Aaron said to them, "Take off the rings of gold which are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." So all the people took off the rings of gold which were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made a molten calf. And he said, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." So here's the situation. The people became impatient with their new Pharaoh, Moses. He wasn't responding to them as they wanted, and so they sought to have a false god. The false god they made was one of gold, which symbolizes one of wealth. So now they've got two false gods. They've got the dogma of their religion, and they've got their wealth. Now let's see what Moses' reaction is to this. As soon as Moses came down from the mountain near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, his anger burned hot, and he threw the tablets of the 10 Commandments out of his hands and broke them at the foot of the mountain. Then Moses stood in the gate of the camp and said, "Who is on Being's side? Come to me." And all the sons of Levi gathered themselves together to him. And he said, "Thus says the being gods of Israel, every man put his sword on his side and go to and fro from gate to gate throughout the camp and slay every man and his brother and every man and his companion and every man and his neighbor." And the sons of Levi did according to the word of Moses. Thus there fell of the people that day about 3,000 people. All right, now this is an allegory. What it's saying is that the leaders of an organization, of a dogma organization, will punish anyone who begins to think for themselves. The people, he could have come down the mountain and said to them, "I notice that you've developed a false god. At least you're beginning in some way to make decisions for yourself. I don't think you're listening you're knowing the situation with the tree of the knowledge of life. You're knowing it with the tree of the knowledge of good and bad. You're taking on a false self. But at least you're beginning to make your own choices. You do not have to live according to my way, my dogma, my laws. You're free to do what you want to do. He did not do that. Religions punish. Today, Muslims are punished for not conforming to the Quran. We know that in past times, Christians have been brutally punished and murdered for not conforming to Christian doctrine. That goes on all over the world. In social groups, when somebody doesn't conform, they're punished. In political groups, you're punished. So part of creating a religion is to have a punishment and a reward system for people, to force people to adhere to the dogma and the rules of the organization. And that way, they become robots. Their freedom is lost. They're systematically taught not to listen to spirit, not to be on their own, but to conform, or they will suffer consequences. Moses is creating a perfect religion. Now let's learn from Exodus what happened to Moses because he created this religion. Being declared, not one of these men of this evil generation shall see that good earth which I swore to give to your fathers. Even you, Moses, shall not go in there. Joshua, the son of Nun, who stands before you, he shall go in there. Encourage him, for he shall cause Israel to inherit it. Okay, this is an allegory. What this passage is saying is that when we become a dogma-ite leader, we will not enter the Garden of Eden, we will not enter the promised earth, we will not enter the kingdom, and we will not enter nirvana. To the degree that we control the other people, to that degree we are banished from all that we desire. And to the degree that we conform to a dogma-ite leader, to that degree we do not enter the promised earth. That's the force of the passage. That's why Moses died in the wilderness with all of his people. Now Joshua clearly was on the way of the soul. He and his followers are now about to enter the promised earth. Joshua, in the book of Joshua, comments on the situation. Let me read it. For the sons of Israel walked 40 years in the wilderness until all the nation, the men of war that came forth out of Egypt, perished because they did not listen to the voice of being. So the people of following Moses were in the wilderness 40 years. Now 40 is a metaphor for a long time. 40 days is a relatively short long time. 40 years is a very long time. So Joshua is saying that Moses and his people were in the wilderness 40 years. Now the number 40 is a metaphor for a long time. It doesn't necessarily mean exactly 40 years. They were wandering without inspiration that they were receiving directly from Spirit. In that time, Moses created a religion. And Joshua is saying all of that happened because they did not listen to the voice of being. That is the end of the lesson. It's the end of, I think, a very powerful allegory about how religions begin and how they begin to control people and how we're being controlled throughout the world by government, by social institutions, by advertisement. All of those are religions, and they all preach, use the same techniques in different ways. Their goal is not to empower people, to be themselves. They're not giving information and saying, now you decide. Rather, they're deciding for people, and they use convincing methods to force conformity. If you like this lesson, click on like below. If you have comments and questions, I'd like to hear them and I'll answer them. If you click on the channel button on the left, we go to the next lesson. If you want to read more of the books, you can go to the website below, www.7771.org. There you can again read the overview of the difference between the way of the soul and the way of the mind. And if you haven't registered, you can register to receive further information. Thank you, and I enjoyed being with you. I hope it was helpful. Have a great rest of your day.